Shalom, everyone. I hope you're doing fine wherever you are today. So, the long something which has been said. This is something which we have always been having a discussion about. But then, what if we try to hear a perspective of these professors about this issue? That is, what about the scattered 12 tribes of Israel that we also need to talk about? And at some point, I talked about this in my channel, and some people needed a little bit of proof about this because we are having a discussion. As you always know, this topic is always multi-faced by a number of factors, and different people have a different perspective about these issues. And I believe that I'm here to present you with this white professor who is going to explain things in details. He's going to explain things in a deeper way to make us try to understand. Why am I bringing this white professor to discuss about this? It is because it takes a different person for some of us to believe this. You know, if a black folk come and says this, they'll say that no, that's an ox, that's not true. So it takes a different person to come and say this. And I believe that this video is so important, and it is long due that we discuss about this. So I want us to watch this video and then get to tell me what you think about this video. At the end of the video, I'll also provide my perspectives, read you some articles of things which are written about the same about this issue. So I hope that we get to jump right into the video and get to watch the video. So let's jump into it.
So quite a number of years ago, I was having dinner in a club, a very fancy sort of conservative British club in London, and somebody asked me if I would go the following week to the Sudan to write a report on Ethiopian Jews who allegedly were being poisoned in the refugee camps along the border with Ethiopia. And I agree, and I agreed, and I turned up in Sudan and got on a little bus which took me across the desert to a place called Gudaref, which is on the border with Ethiopia. And at the time, this was many years ago, it was the time of the great Ethiopian famine. The whole area was filled with refugee camps and grotesquely emaciated people. I'm sure you've seen images of the famine on television and so on. And I wandered around these refugee camps looking for the Ethiopian Jews who were supposed to be there, and eventually I located them. And it just so happened that my arrival in this refugee camp coincided with the beginning of an extraordinary operation on the part of the Israeli government to rescue these Jews and to take them from these stinking and awfully badly organized refugee camps to Israel. And that operation was called Operation Moses. And that, in a way, was the beginning of my own interest in the question of the lost tribes of Israel, because the Ethiopian Jews were permitted to go to Israel as citizens, as free citizens, while being black people from Africa, because of the idea that they formed one of the lost tribes of Israel, namely the tribe of Dan, and that it was on this basis that they could go and settle in Israel. So this was my first lost tribe of Israel. And the story of the Ethiopian Jews is one of the most dramatic stories, the most exciting stories, I think, in modern Jewish history, how they got from Ethiopia to Israel, what happened when they got there, and of course the mass of myths and legends that surrounds their history. Because ever since, I should think, the 9th century, perhaps a little bit earlier, European society had been convulsed with the idea that somewhere in Africa there would be a kingdom either controlled by the great figure of Prester John, or, according to other versions of this basic legend, a kingdom that was dominated by the lost tribes of Israel. And so right from the 9th century well into the 20th century, the idea that the lost tribes of Israel somehow were to be found in the interior of Africa was one of these myths that dominated the ways that Europeans visualized and understood, comprehended the unknown outside world. So we all imagine, I'm sure you as well, you imagine the life beyond Utah. And some of you know it, some of you don't. But anyway, there's a horizon and there's a periphery. And beyond that periphery, you don't really know it so well. You know this world. And the world beyond Utah and beyond your own faith is one that you have to construct really for your own purposes. And thus it was in medieval Europe. They didn't know what was beyond Europe. They had no real conception, and so it was imagined, it was constructed, it was created in the mind. And one of the chief factors in the construction of this outside world was the fact that certainly somewhere the lost tribes of Israel were to be found, that there were a powerful, rich, potent force, and for many people and for many generations, the idea was that they could perhaps at some point in the future be counted on to come to the aid either of Christendom, according to the version, or to Jews as they were being persecuted by Christians in Europe. And a further extension of this idea was that they would somehow outwit the forces of Islam, who were the clear main enemies of Europeans well into the modern period, and still, in a way, can be seen as being so. So this is the background, and Africa was the locus that many of the ideas of the lost tribes, the ideas coalesced around some place in Africa, and very often around Ethiopia. But Ethiopia wasn't the only situs for this myth. Just about every other bit of Africa at some point or another has been associated with it, and I don't think there's a part of the world which has not at some point or another been associated with the lost tribes, from Britain itself, and you've probably heard of the British Israelite movement, Scandinavia, Australia, New Zealand, South America, North America. Wherever you go in the world, somebody at some point or another has said, this is where the lost tribes are or have been. So anyway, I had some kind of knowledge of this when I came across the Ethiopian Jews in the Sudan. And while I was there, I illegally crossed the border, and I had already met some of these Ethiopians in the camps, and they started to tell me their stories. And particularly what they said was that they'd been walking in some cases for 3 months from the highlands of Ethiopia, and that on the way they'd been attacked. The girls had often enough been raped. They'd been attacked by bandits, in some cases by wild animals, and they were in an absolutely pitiful state. And they said, if you really want to see what it was like, you have to take the path that we ourselves took here. And they indicated the path, and they told me to travel at night, because if I traveled at day, I'd be shot at by helicopters that patrolled the route down from Lake Gondar. So I traveled at night with a group of Ethiopians, and indeed I saw these people in other evolutions coming down this route from the highlands and making their way to the camps on the border. And one group that I travelled with, we arrived at the border. We crossed the border. There was no control at all at the time, and just in front of where we were, there was a very pitiful-looking UN hut. It was no more than 1 story, but it had a kind of tower. And compared with the pitiful little shacks that were the other buildings in the area, it was reasonably impressive. And the people that I was with, they looked at this and they said, "My God, this is amazing. This surely must be the place that we've been traveling towards. This must be Jerusalem." And they threw themselves on the floor and started to worship the ground that they were absolutely certain was Jerusalem. Of course, it wasn't, and it was still a very long route that they had to follow. But I was taken by this community. I was taken by their simple faith, and I was taken by the extraordinary romance, if you like, of their story and of the legend that ultimately led them to be where they were. And a few months later, I was invited to go to a university in South Africa and give a talk on the Ethiopian Jews. And at the back of the hall, something like this, at the end of my talk, I noticed a group of black people who were very, very shabbily dressed. They were barefoot, unlike the wealthy, Johannesburg people who were neatly turned out and so on. And I wandered over to see these people. They were wearing yarmulkes or kippot, Jewish skullcaps. And they explained to me that they were Jewish, and they told me they were a lost tribe as well, and they were called the Lemba. And I must have looked pretty dismissive, maybe even a little bit of a sneer was perceived on my face, and they looked a bit disappointed and a bit abashed. And they said, well, all you need to do is to come back with us to our villages, spend a few days, and you will see that what we're saying about ourselves is absolutely true. And so I did. I went up to Venda, where they lived, and spent a weekend. At the end of the weekend, I was pretty sure that the habits and the customs and the stories and the legends that they told me were in some way authentic, and I resolved to write a book about it. And it was an intriguing thing, because they told me they'd come from an unknown place, from a lost city in the north, and the lost city was called Senna. And so I had the idea of somehow walking across Africa, following the traces that the Lemba would lead me to, picking up clues as I went, and trying to find this lost city of Senna. And I spent about 6 months on this journey. It was one of the best times of my life. And eventually I got to the Red Sea, and I was sitting on a beach, looking out towards the ocean, and I had failed to find out where these people had come from. I had failed to find out if they were really the Jewish tribe that they claimed to be. I had failed to find out if they were a lost tribe of Israel, as claimed. But I'd had a great journey, and I went on to write a book that was translated into quite a number of languages, and I was reasonably content, but not completely content, because after all, in my heart of hearts, I hadn't solved the puzzle that I'd tried to resolve in the first place. But a couple of years later, or maybe even the next year, I was in the Yemen, and if ever you have the chance, if you haven't done your mission yet, and you can persuade the authorities to send you to the Yemen, if the position in the Yemen is somewhat more peaceful than it is at the moment, I would strongly urge you to go there, because it's one of the most extraordinary places in the world. And I was talking to I was traveling down through the Hadramaut, which is a great valley which crosses through the empty quarter, which is the great desert of Saudi Arabia. And I was speaking to a holy Muslim Mukhtar, and I didn't know how holy he was. Anyway, he was an Islamic Mukhtar. And we were having a conversation, and he said, well, what do you do with yourself? And I said, well, I'm a professor of Jewish studies, and I teach Hebrew and Jewish history and this, that, and the other. And he said, well, very interesting, very fine people, the Jews. And he said, what have you been doing recently? And I told him the story about the Lemba and how I'd crossed Africa looking for this mythical place, as I imagined, called Senna. And he clapped his hands together and he said, well, hang on, there's a place right at the end of the Wadi, probably 4 or 5 hours from here. Very ancient place it is too. It used to be inhabited. It used to have a great dam which cracked in about 1200, and since then it's really been abandoned. But I can tell you this, that it used to send its population to Africa. So I thought, maybe this has got something to do with my story. So we took the Land Rover and we went to the end of the Wadi, we found this place. And what I discovered almost immediately was that the people who lived around the area had the same tribal names as the tribal names of my African lost tribe. And I thought, my goodness, this looks as if it might be leading to something rather exciting and interesting. But still, there was no, smoking gun. There was no graffiti on the wall which said, the Lemba were here, or, the lost tribe went in the direction of Africa, or something like that. Nothing. So then, this was now, getting on towards 1996 or 1997, and this was the moment in history when we were first able to access that history book which everybody carries around inside them, and that is, of course, our DNA. And before that, it had not been possible. It was still very expensive to do. But I had friends in the Department of Genetics at University College London, and together we decided that we would do a major research trip, and we would collect DNA in South Arabia, and we connect it, and we would compare it with the Lemba DNA, and also with the other populations spread out between the Indian Ocean and the areas where the Lemba live. And so this was a major thing. It took a few months, and we finished up with a nice pile of DNA, and this was shipped off to the genetic wallers in the labs at University College, and then we got the results. And what was I expecting? Was I really expecting that this would answer my questions? Well, one of the questions, what were my questions? Let's just run through it again. Yeah. Were they really a lost tribe of Israel? That was one question. What was the other question? Yeah. Were they really from Senna, and were they really Jewish? Right, that was the last thing. So, well, Jews are a religion. Are you going to be able to get anything about Jews as a religion from DNA? That I didn't really think would come through. Were they from Senna? That seemed plausible, if this was the Senna that I imagined it might be. So that possible. Lost tribes of Israel, a group that had disappeared from the face of the earth 600 or 700 years before the Christian era. That seemed to me, to be pretty unlikely. So we got the data, and it's the case that just a few months before I was doing this, I was involved in another project. And that project had to do with the Kohanim. Does anybody know what the Kohanim are? The Hebrew word Kohen. Priest, thank you very much. Jewish priests are called Kohanim. And I'm sure that you may have met in your lives or heard of somebody called Mr. Cohen or Mrs. Cohen. Well, if a man is called Cohen, the chances are that he is a priest, and there are various other Hebrew names that Jews use which indicate that he is of priestly origin. And so the idea would be that these people of priestly origin were descended from priests who at one point in history officiated on the temple in Jerusalem. But if you think about it, was there really very much likelihood or chance that Mr. Cohen down the block really had anything to do with, these priests that fill the stories of the Bible, the New Testament and the Old Testament, and also your own scriptures? Not really. But anyway, we decided to put this to the test. So we collected hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of Mr. Cohens from all over the world, many of them on the beach in Tel Aviv, as it happens. And we took all of their DNA and we analyzed it. And remarkably, and rather incredibly, well over 50% of these Kohanim, these guys, were descended from a single person, a single man. And we also know that that single man lived in the area of Israel 3,000 years ago. Now, I can tell you individually, or maybe afterwards, how you can determine this through genetics, but believe me, for the moment, you more or less can. Not perhaps with total precision, but you can more or less. So we had this piece, and of course, what would this suggest? This would suggest maybe that the person from whom these 52% of all people in the world who identify themselves as priests or Kohanim were descended from who was the founder of the priestly line. This is something you should know. Aaron, thank you very much. So that they were all descended from Aaron. Okay, now as we started to look at the data coming from the Lemba DNA, well, we found out first of all that on the male side, they were definitely Semitic. Now, what does Semitic mean? Again, this is something that I'm sure you do know. What is Semitic? I beg your pardon? Descended, well, I suppose, yes, descended from Shem. That's absolutely correct. And who are the Semitic peoples then? Who are the people that we think of as being Semitic peoples? Jews and Arabs, people living in that part of the world, and the Semitic languages are Hebrew, Arabic, and Aramaic, and various others. So the determination then was that the Lemba, who are living right in the middle of Africa, and who have no Hebrew, no Semitic language, who look exactly the same as other Bantu people living in the same area, but they have this rather peculiar, very unlikely claim to be descended from the lost tribes of Israel, which perhaps was completely fanciful. When we looked at the DNA, what did we discover? We discovered that on the male line, they were indeed Semitic. So something about their claims was clearly true. And then we started digging a little bit deeper. Now, the Lemba are divided into a number of clans. They like to say that there are 12 tribes of the Lemba, and this seems also to reflect, the 12 tribes of Israel. In reality, there are something like 13 and a half tribes, but one of them was a priestly clan called the Buba, and it was a very important clan. And when we looked at the DNA of this important priestly clan, what did we find? We found that 52% of their priestly clan had exactly the same DNA profile as Jewish priests throughout the world. And so the corollary of that is that these guys, these black, Bantu-speaking people with the very fanciful claim, were descended from the same person, plausibly, but not provably, Aaron, who lived some 3,000 years ago in the land of Israel. And of course, as you can well imagine, when I heard this, I felt the sort of shiver that goes down a scholarly spine 2 or 3 times in the course of a career, if you're lucky. And I thought, my goodness, what an extraordinary thing. So what does this show us? It shows us that identity is much more complex than we might possibly have thought, that it's conceivably possible to find Jews in a place that one would never have thought to find Jews, and it also says something about the power of memory, because this tribe probably had been divorced from any knowledge of other Jews or from any knowledge of the Middle East for who knows? I don't know. Maybe 1,000 years, maybe longer. But it says something about the power of memory. And it also says something to us, which we should not forget for a second, and that is that when people tell us things, and when they talk about their traditions, their oral traditions, we should take them very, very seriously. And I'm very glad that I did take this particular legend very, very seriously. So I'll now show you a couple of these images, if it's possible to extract them from this machine, which, as you know, I regard with great suspicion. So I'll just show you a couple here. So these are, you see, Ethiopian Jews. And this is a Lemba playing one of their traditional shofars. And this is the rather extraordinary ruin in Zimbabwe, which they associate themselves with, and I think probably with justice. And this is me on my long 6-month journey in a small village in Mposi. And of course, once the story that DNA had proved the oral traditions of a tribe in the rather dramatic way that it did, you know, it became a worldwide story, and I was on 60 Minutes and the full business, and I don't think there was a major newspaper in the world that didn't say something about it. So this is one example. Now you might say, okay, this was a one-off parfit. You're never going to have the same luck again. Well, you're wrong. So there's a very interesting community. We're going now from Africa, across the Indian Ocean, to Western India. And what big city is there in the western coast of India? Anybody know? Big city. Mumbai, thank you very much. Without you, I don't know what we'd do. So there's Mumbai. Just near Mumbai, there's a rather beautiful coastline, which is called the Konkan Coast. And so there's a group there called the Bene Israel. You can visit them if ever you're in India. It's a fascinating group. Many of them have migrated by now to Israel. But the history of this group is extremely problematic, put it like this. There was no mention of them in any sort of historical source until about 1760, and even that source is, I think, dubious. The Bene Israel thought of themselves as Jews, as from, let's say, about 1800. They were not thought of as Jews by the other Jews in India. There were quite a number of other Jews in India, both in the south in Kerala and also in Mumbai, which then was called Bombay. And there was no intermarriage between these groups. There was no interdining. If ever the Bene Israel went into the grand and beautiful synagogues of the other Jews, they were told to sit on the floor. They weren't allowed to sit on the comfortable benches. And even in Israel, they were, generally speaking, looked down upon and despised. Why? Because nobody believed their story. They had a myth of origin which went down, as my grandmother used to say, like a lead balloon. So we thought that we would do some kind of research, genetic research, that might cast some light upon this very dubious community. Why was it dubious? Well, first of all, like the Lemba, they had nothing in common physically, as far as we could see, with any other Jews. They're short, they're black, and what do we know about their traditions? They seem to form part of the Indian caste system. So they had a a caste occupation. They were not quite untouchable class, they were slightly above that, but they were embedded in the Indian caste system. The name of their little prayer hall was the same name that Muslims use for describing their mosque. That would suggest that perhaps they were of Islamic origin. And various other things like this. The whole thing was deeply, deeply dubious. They didn't seem to be a Jewish community at all. But they had their legend, which 2,000 years ago they had settled. They'd come in a boat, 7 people in a boat, and they'd settled on the Konkan coast. So what did the DNA show? The DNA showed that this is their graveyard on the Konkan, and this is the stele which describes how they got there. And so, as you can see from the Times of India, which is the highest circulation English newspaper in the world, and this was the Times of India on Sunday. As you can see, this is the headline of that particular day, July the 21st, 2002. And a couple of days before that, we'd had a seminar in Oxford where I had revealed the DNA study, which shows, as you can see, that not only were they of Semitic origin and had come from the Middle East at some point in history, but also that some of them carried this haplotype, which is associated with the probably or plausibly the originator of the priesthood. So the very, very nice thing, well, in the case of the Lemba, of course, it was highly gratifying to be able to say to the Lemba, well, this was, your story was right, and I was completely wrong not to fully believe it. And in the case of the Bene Israel Jews, it was the same. It was the same story. Their response was extraordinary, and the morning after, the Monday morning, after this headline appeared on the Times of India, the streets of Mumbai were full of Bene Israel who were dancing and rejoicing and feasting because this was the piece of information, this was the proof that they had needed for a couple of years to be able to say to other Jews, look, we're just as good as you are, and this is the evidence, and this was the evidence that they'd been waiting for. And I think it really has changed the profile of the community. So, the takeaway from this particular story, I won't give the same takeaway as the takeaway from the Lemba, it could be a different takeaway, and that is the extraordinary power of genetic research on people's identity. And I wrote a book some few years ago on the subject of identity and genetics, and you're all pretty young in this room, a good deal younger than me, and you've got a few more years to live, and I'm sure that by the time you get to my age, genetics will be so sophisticated and will tell us so much that it's going to be a very, very, very potent feature, not only of your community and your church, but for other people outside it as well. So you're absolutely right to put so much emphasis, I think, on genealogical research and genetic research. But okay, well, these are two pretty, impressive success stories about how linking genetic research and historical and anthropological research, what it can do. And let me just move forward a little bit here. It doesn't always work. So a few years ago, I went to visit my son, who decided to do his MBA in faraway Australia. And so I flew to Sydney, and there were a couple of announcements in the papers, that I was going to be giving my talk and so on. And I got a telephone call in my hotel room, and a guy had called me from Papua New Guinea, from the Gogodala tribe, and he explained to me that he was the spiritual leader of this particular tribe in western Papua New Guinea. And I quickly Googled the tribe after the conversation and discovered that they had been cannibals until about 1950 or so. And he told me that they were in fact a lost tribe of Israel, and that the lost Ark of the Covenant was to be seen if one were to go there in the lagoon. It's a place called the Fly Estuary, and he'd seen it many, many times, he told me, the lost Ark of the Covenant, and it shot fire and smoke and lightning into the sky, and it was truly remarkable. And what he really wanted me to do, because he'd seen the stuff that I'd been doing on DNA and the Lemba and the Bene on the internet, and so he wanted me to go to Papua New Guinea to do the same thing with the Gogodala, this particular tribe. And so in due course, I turned up, and I saw more Israeli flags in the capital and subsequently in the villages than I'd ever seen before in my life. And there was a very rapturous and wonderful reception given for me. And these were the people who met me at the airport, and who subsequently went with me to the village.
You know, we still have people who don't believe the scattered tribes of Israel. One of them is, the black people, and we are not Hebrew Israelites, and some people claim that there is no tangible evidence that shows that this is true. So I tried to find out, why are they saying that these might not be true? And I tried to dig some things, and I found some information, and I found their claims, and I'm trying to present their claims so that we can try to look at it. And you gotta tell me what to think about their claims, because as you can see, this professor, I've shown, has proven, I've shown empiricism, I've shown some archaeological facts. However, still, I'm going to present the other side of these people who still don't believe that this is true. So I'll go just directly to read the article, and let's talk about it. So somebody said that they claim that the story of the 12 tribes of Israel is an hoax is primarily rooted in skepticism about the historically of biblical narratives, interpretations of archaeological evidence, and differing perspectives of ancient history. Somebody said that there is lack of archaeological evidence, sparse evidence for early Israelite settlements. Skeptics point out that there is limited archaeological evidence supporting the existence of unified and distinct group of tribes in the early age, that is around 1200 to 1000 BCE, that matches the biblical description of the 12 tribes of Israel. Also, under the lack of archaeological evidence, somebody supported it by saying some archaeological findings suggest that the population of ancient Canaan was more diverse and integrated than the biblical narrative of a distinct and unified Israelite people. I'm not the one who is saying this. Rather, I'm trying to bring an open opinion of this topic. I want also you to hear about the argument of other people. Whereas I might know you believe that is true, because I also believe, but discussing this as a discourse, we also need to put on the table what other parties feel and think about this. And you gotta tell me in the comment section about your point of view, about what they're also thinking. The second point about this issue is mythologization of oral tradition. Mythologization of oral tradition. The stories of the 12 tribes were transmitted orally for centuries before being written down. Oral traditions can be prone to embellishment and myth making, leading to some to argue the biblical accounts are legendary rather than historical. Also, comparative mythology. Some scholars compare the biblical stories to other ancient Near Eastern myths and legends, suggesting that the narrative about the 12 tribes may have been influenced by or borrowed from neighboring cultures. Number 3, the weakness that somebody also talked about. Somebody talked about the weakness about inconsistencies and anachronism in the biblical text. I'll read again. Inconsistencies and anachronism in the biblical text. Biblical inconsistency. Critics point out various inconsistencies within the biblical text regarding the number of names of the tribes, their geographical locations, and their roles in different narratives. These inconsistencies can cast doubt on the historical accuracy of the accounts. I know people have been questioning the Bible since then. So this is something which some people still out there are questioning a lot of things, including the 12 tribes of Israel. Trust me when I say this, because I've heard people going out there saying that that's an ox, that's not true, and different people have their belief. Of course, I'm a believer, but then, as I said, I have to present this for this discourse so that you can get to see what other people are thinking and what we are also thinking. Anachronism. Certain elements in the Bible stories are seen as anachronistic, reflecting the contents and context of a later period rather than the time they purport to describe. This suggests that the stories may have been retroactively constructed or adapted. The fourth reason is sociopolitical motivations. Some scholars argue that the story of the 12 tribes of Israel were constructed as part of nation building effort during the time of the United Monarchy or the early monarchy of Judah. These stories served to create a sense of shared identity and divine destiny among the disparate groups. Another reason under socio-political motivations is political agendas. The narrative of unified Israel identity centered around the 12 tribes of Israel could have served political purposes, legitimizing the rule of certain leaders or justifying territorial claims. The fifth one is historical critical scholarship. Critical historical analysis. Historical critical scholarship approach the Bible as a composite text written by multiple authors over centuries. They analyze the text in the context of their time, often finding that the stories of the 12 tribes reflect theological and ideological concerns rather than historical reality. Also, that's a point of minimalist school of thought. The minimalist school of thought of biblical scholarship is particularly skeptical about the history of early Israelites' history. Minimalists argue that there is little to no evidence of a significant Israelite presence in the Canaan during the periods prescribed in the Bible. What can I say about this issue? For me, I feel like I'm a believer that it is true we had the 12 tribes of Israel. And in as much as these people are coming out with these articles trying to say that the evidence provided are not enough, for me, this is my stand. For me, I believe that it is true. This happened, So the conclusion of this article states that while the traditional narrative of the 12 tribes of Israel is a foundational element of Jewish and Christian religions' heritage, it faces skepticism from various quarters due to the lack of corroborating archaeological evidence, the nature of oral tradition, textual inconsistencies, and historical critical analysis. The debate continues, with some scholars advocating for more nuanced understanding that recognizes both historical and mythological elements within the biblical accounts. My takeaway from this is that if you understand your true mythology, if you understand who you are as a person And I believe this discourse is subject to various interpretations because people interpret Bible differently. And generally, it was not just to attack the Bible, but it was to make sure that we represent both parties. And of course, as I said earlier, and I'll say it again, I'm a believer. Indeed, we have the 12 tribes of Israel, and some people will say that they are lost. They ain't lost. They are scattered. And when we add the division of the kingdom during the time of King Solomon, we add the Judah and we have the Israelites when they divided, and this thing happened. They scattered due to some reasons, and I could also give some reasons as to why they were scattered, because it's also here. So I'm going to tell you why they were scattered and not lost also. Just give me a minute. 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 A minute. Okay. Yeah. So one is the political division. That's the first reason as to why they were scattered. After the death of King Solomon around 1930 BCE, the United Kingdom of Israel split into two separate kingdoms: the Northern Kingdom, that's the Israel, and the Southern Kingdom, that's the Judah. The Northern Kingdom consisted the 12 tribes, while the Southern Kingdom included the tribes of Judah and Benjamin and many of the Levites. Two is Assyrian expansion. That's the second reason as to why they were scattered. The Assyrian Empire, under rulers like Tiglath-Pileser III and Sargon II, expanded aggressively during the 8th century BCE. The Northern Kingdom of Israel became a target due to its strategic location and resources. The third thing under the Assyrian conquest and deportation is assimilation. The Israelites who were deported gradually assimilated into the surrounding populations. Adopting local languages, customs, and religions, this process led to the loss of distinct Israel identity over time. The third reason is Babylonian conquest. Conquest of Judah, that is 586 BCE. The southern kingdom of Judah, which included Jerusalem and the temple, was conquered by the Babylonian Empire under King Nebuchadnezzar in Nebuchadnezzar II in 586 BCE. The Babylonians also practiced deportation, exiling a significant portion of population to the Babylon. The fourth reason for their scattering is internal strife and division. Internal conflicts, including political power struggles and religious disagreements, weakened the cohesion of the Israelite tribes. Division among the tribes themselves made them more vulnerable to external threats. Common reasons like economic reasons. Economic factors such as trade and migration also played a role in scattering of the tribes. As the trade routes developed, some Israelites migrated to other regions for economic opportunities, and this is something which is natural. The sixth reason is influence of foreign cultures and religions. I'll talk about the cultural assimilation. I think we have also talked about that, but let's see. Exposure to dominant cultures and religions of conquering empires, in bracket Assyrian, Babylonian, Persian, Greek, and Roman, led to cultural assimilation. Over time, the distinct culture and religious practices of the Israelites diminished as they adopted the customs and beliefs of their conquerors. The seventh reason is Roman dispersion. Destruction of the Second Temple, that is 70 CE. The Roman Empire's destruction of the Second Temple in Jerusalem, that is in the 70 CE, and the subsequent Bar Kokhba revolt, that is 132 to 136 CE, resulted in the further dispersion of the Jewish population. Although this primarily affected the remaining population of Judah, it contributed to the broader Jewish diaspora. What are the consequences of this dispersion? One is loss of identity. The combined impact of this led to the gradual loss of distinct tribal identities. The Israelites who were deported or migrated often assimilated into the local population, losing their unique culture and heritage. Diaspora. The concept of Jewish diaspora emerged from these historical events. The Jewish community established themselves in various parts of the world, including the Middle East, Europe, and North Africa. So there is some historical evidence that also asserts the opposite, which proves that truly we have the 12 tribes of Israel, which were scattered. And as much as some people claim that there are so much inconsistencies in rendition of these facts. So tell me what you think about this topic. This is your presenter, Eugene Talk Stories. Until then, let's meet on my next video. Peace, love, and harmony. Salute.